Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of What If Naruto Became the Jonin Sensei of Kushina. If you enjoy the video then like, share and subscribe and also comment your thoughts as it inspires me to make more such videos, and remember to check out my playlist section for other interesting stories. So let's get started. Makoto could swear she heard her bones creak as she blocked another strike from her sensei. The Uchiha had originally thought that her sensei's training was insane, but with his new training regime she knew, Naruto had been taking it easy on them. His new level of training took insane and cranked it right the way up to 11. Before breaking the dial that said 11 and replacing it with one that went all the way up to 100 and somehow pushing it to 101. And then some. Some of the things he had them do seemed to take insane and then throw it out the window before taking their training, as Naruto called it, beyond the impossible. After they managed to survive their 11-hour sparring session against him, the blonde had chosen to work on their taijutsu, when he told them that the blonde added he would be taking a leaf out of Guy and Lee's book on the subject. When they had asked him who they were, the blonde just chuckled evilly, the same way he did before throwing exploding model cows at them. All three genin were instantly scared for their lives, for good reason. Makoto didn't know who Guy and Lee were, but if this was their training routine then the men must be closer to beasts. When she said that to Naruto, the blonde had just smiled and replied, "Green beasts to be exact." All the while chuckling at some kind of private joke. For the next month Team 5 got up at 4 am and trained until 1800 or 6 p.m. every day. The day started with a relaxing, as Naruto called it, run around the entire village of Konoha 7 times, and when Naruto said run he meant sprint. Following that was taijutsu katas. The blonde was merciless even there. They did it with weights, on water, while running, dodging thrown weapons, while tree jumping. Naruto would assign some kind of exercise to be done while executing the katas at the same time. The blonde laughed while they did it, telling them it would teach them the power of youth. All the while cackling like a madman. Needless to say, the entire team wanted to kill him after day 1. Following the taijutsu katas, the blonde would train their chakra control. They did everything from water walking to kunai balancing, and hell, Naruto even showed them a few exercises that they never ever knew existed. Such as water sphere floating, which was exactly what it sounded like, floating a sphere of water over your hand using nothing but pure chakra control. What Naruto didn't tell them was that the sphere would blow up in their faces if they got it wrong. Makoto cursed the man for that. The day ended with Naruto teaching them some of his personal taijutsu style, though the blonde admitted that he hadn't come up with a name for it yet. When the month was finally over, the team celebrated as Naruto told them that now he would move on to teaching them other things while just maintaining their strength rather than trying to increase it. The cheers died immediately when the blonde told them that the level of hell had just doubled now that they had reached the appropriate strength to survive it. It was at that moment they learned what hell really was. The blonde was relentless. Everything he could think of for the next 4 months he pounded into them, from extra taijutsu to nin, gen, ken and even fuinjutsu. Hell, the blonde forced his 3 genin to master the first step of each of their nature manipulations in 2 months. They were spared nothing. Naruto's training was brutal and always to the point. His constant monologue always running. Every time a block wasn't quite perfect they were punished for it. Every stance, form, technique had to be performed flawlessly. Naruto neither needed nor wanted that. The blonde demanded that. He had told the 3 of his genin Tsunade's reaction to placing them into the Chunin exams. Her reaction was just used by them like fuel. To prove her words wrong they all pushed themselves to the brink to be better, faster, and stronger than any other genin team. Naruto saw their drive and used it to push them harder, all the while laughing not so quietly at his genin's misfortune. Then started laughing harder, as he pictured the misfortune of any genin that faced them in the exams. Makoto skidded along the ground, before pushing herself off the ground and snarling at the shadow clone in front of her and charging. The ground under her cracked with the force of her kicking off it. The black-haired girl closed, her left hand lashing out in a vicious hook at the blonde's face. Naruto's clone leaned back and allowed to attack to pass over him, before grabbing the offending limb. Unlike 5 months ago, Makoto saw this as an opportunity, using Naruto's grip to pull her in closer and launching a knee at the blonde's head. Naruto blocked with his left arm. Makoto smiled and sent chakra to her eyes, turning them blood red with 2 tomes spinning slowly in each. She twisted, forcing him to release her, before kicking at his sternum, she saw Naruto move in slow motion, hand coming up to guard. Makoto altered her angle of attack and her kick changed at the last second to one at the clone's ribs. Naruto smiled and almost seemed to flow around the attack, spinning and planting a nasty heel kick into the black-haired girl's abdomen. Spit flew out of her mouth and Naruto nodded to himself. He had 1 month and Makoto was more than fast enough now. The clone called an end to their sparring session. Okay, that's enough, Makoto-chan, the Naruto clone called out and the Uchiha gratefully collapsed to the ground. Now then, I am aware that you three are going to need to have some kind of trump card in the exams, and that is what we are going to train for the rest of the month. It should also help you in showing the Uchiha clan that a lightning user is just as good as a fire user. Naruto declared to the girl. Makoto looked up, surprise in her eyes. Really, sensei? Is it that Rasengan thing you used against Kusama? Makoto questioned. Naruto shook his head in a negative. No, you won't be learning the Rasengan just yet, but this attack is just as good. Naruto assured the 12 going on 13-year-old. To look at the pros and the cons of the two attacks, then they come out around even. But you should be able to make use of this attack easier than the Rasengan as it is lightning element by nature. The Naruto clone continued his lecture, before fixing Makoto with a stern glare. Makoto, this attack is listed as a personal jutsu of mine, so under no circumstances are you to tell anyone about it, nor are you to teach it to the other Uchiha, or anyone else for that matter. This move is going to be reserved for you and me alone. The black-haired girl nodded enthusiastically, before looking at Naruto in suspicion. If you know the three of us need a trump card, then why are you teaching this attack to only me? Makoto asked. Naruto sighed and wiped a hand over his face. She was sharp, he would give her that. More importantly, she cared about her teammates. That was good, that was very good. The blonde took a deep breath. Those two will be given their own trump cards. Kushina will have the Rasengan. Naruto held up a hand to stifle Makoto's complaints before they started. Listen to me, Makoto. In the Chunin exams you may well have to show that you have a lightning-type chakra nature. If that happens, then if what you have told me is correct, then the clan will use that against you. The attack I will teach you, the Chidori, is an A-rank Raiden jutsu for assassination. However, it has only one real downside. The attack cannot be used reliably without a Sharingan in order to avoid any kind of counter-attack. For the Uchiha clan to see a Raiden technique like that coming from you, I think that they will allow you to stay inside the clan. At the very least, such a powerful technique coupled with the Uchiha Dojutsu should shut them up. Naruto sighed, looking down at Makoto. Now then, ready to learn? The Uchiha nodded eagerly and Naruto smiled. One last thing. Do well and I've got a present for you. XXX. Naoki looked at his sensei, a pair of hook swords in his hands. They were an unusual weapon, and that was exactly why Naruto had chosen them for Naoki. The Senju heir rushed forward, sword leading. Naruto unsealed his own sword. An O-katana gifted to him by Mifune of Tetsu no Kuni when he finished his training. The two clashed, and Naoki was in awe. Every dodge Naruto made was by the absolute smallest of margins. Every time he left himself open, he quickly found himself paying for the opening. Already nicks covered his arms and legs, several bruises forming on his arms from slaps with the flat of Naruto's katana. A nasty bruise on his torso, where he was smacked by the blunt side of the blade after overreaching. The two danced around each other, a flow of constant movement, though Naoki was almost constantly on the defensive. The two moved back and forth, though Naruto knew that Naoki couldn't keep this up much longer. In order to increase the boy's already fairly large chakra reserves, Naruto had placed chakra draining seals on the two hook swords. The constantly sapped the boy's strength, making it harder and harder for him to keep up with the Uzugakure Jonin. But the seals were helping. Every day the Senju grew more and more, his chakra reserves and control improving slowly but surely. Naruto had not had another confrontation with Tsunade since the one in the Hokage's office, though he did wonder why that was. The blonde would be the first to admit his training methods were insane, so that did beg the question of why Tsunade hadn't tried to kill him yet. Though Naruto didn't know it, the answer to that particular question was Naoki. The last male Senju was quite well aware of what his sister would do if she found out what Naruto's training methods were. But the Senju could tell simply from how much he had improved that there was indeed method to the blonde's madness, so he ran interference for Naruto. Keeping the blonde safely out of the way from his overprotective older sister's punches, his sensei was strong, no doubt about that, but he was not sure if even Naruto could survive an angry Tsunade. But he was willing to bet that it would be one hell of a fight. Now that he considered it, maybe Naoki should let that fight happen and place a bet on the winner, who knew maybe he could even make some money off it. Naoki fell to his knees. Naruto looked over the Senju air and pulled out a storage scroll. Putting some chakra into the seal matrix and removing its contents. A large rectangular black case, the blonde smiled at the Senju. Well then Naoki, I think you will appreciate this. It might not be any kind of special occasion but here. The blonde threw the case at the Senju's feet, and Naoki opened it cautiously, his mouth dropped open and he looked up at his sensei with nothing but gratitude in his eyes. Laying in the case were possibly the two most beautiful and deadly-looking swords Naoki had ever laid eyes on. Mirror images of each other, the only exception was that one's hilt was wrapped by red leather and the other by blue, crescent blades extending over the knuckles. The blade itself was straight for the most part, but around 15 centimeters from the tip there was a curved metal spike. Though Naoki couldn't see them, seals covered the blade, intricate and interlocking. Naruto smiled at his student. These are called blue crimson. Anyone who knows where that is originally from, give yourself a pat on the back cause you're awesome. I do want to state that I have just taken the name. They have no abilities like the originals. I've put a few seals throughout the blades, but they aren't much more than seals to keep the blades permanently sharp and free of rust. These beauties' real power is in their ability to absorb and store your chakra. They do have a limit, but you won't reach that for a while. Naoki picked up the two swords reverently, like they were some kind of holy artifacts. Naruto waved his hand at the Senju in the world-famous, "Bring it," manner. Naoki smiled and charged swords in hand, and the dance of steel started anew. XXX. Kushina cursed her sensei, and not for the first time that day. The blonde had decided that her chakra control wasn't good enough and had her work on it. That had been 5 hours ago. Not that Kushina would have minded that much. If her sensei said it needed work, then it needed work. She trusted Naruto more than enough to believe that. But this was insane. Dodge! Naruto yelled, firing another jutsu at Kushina, who flipped out of the way by vaulting off the water's surface. That was the way Naruto was training her chakra control. She would be standing of the surface of water, while performing taijutsu katas, holding a ball of water over the back of her fists using nothing but chakra control, while dodging jutsu. The man was certifiably insane, that was. Kushina was sure of it. No matter how effective the method was, this was still way too much for training purposes. Or as Naruto put it, this is chakra control training when you take it beyond the impossible. Then proceeded to fire off highly destructive attacks at her. Damn that man. Naruto leapt out on the water and threw a punch at the Uzumaki's face. Kushina jumped and kicked at the offending fist, sending it off at a different angle. The red head landed on her hands and used the force to spring her body off the water's surface and deep into Naruto's guard, throwing a vicious hook at the blonde's kidney. Naruto's hand swept in low and redirected the fist harmlessly around him. Kushina rolled with the push, circling fast and kicking low to the back of the blonde's kneecap. Naruto jumped and twisted in midair, raining down shuriken at Kushina, who jumped back and retuned fire with her own. Naruto touched down and jumped back, his hands blurring through seals. Dodge. Kaden. Gokaku no Jutsu. Naruto yelled, firing off yet another jutsu at the red head. Kushina ran through hand seals of her own and smiled as she saw the fireball coming closer. Sweeten. Sujinheki. Water sprayed, dousing the fireball, and Kushina immediately threw herself into a backwards roll. Avoiding the shurikens that cut through the steam, performing hand seals even as she rolled back on the water's surface. The red head took a deep breath and concentrated on the part of the steam that seemed deepest. Futon. Daitapa. The wind technique left the Uzumaki's mouth and cleared the area. Naruto stood back on the shoreline, hands just finishing his seals. The blonde leapt forward, landing on the water and placing one hand on its surface. Chidori Nagashi. Naruto kept the voltage low enough that it wouldn't do any real damage, but it wouldn't have mattered either way. Kushina was already moving the moment she saw him land on the water. The red head made a mad dash for the shoreline the moment she saw Naruto crouch down, when he placed his hands on its surface. Kushina leapt into the air, half a second before the water became electrified by Naruto's jutsu. But it wasn't going to be enough. She could see herself coming back down onto the water. Her jump hadn't been enough to make it to the shore. Kushina pulled one arm back. Kami, she hoped this worked. The hand was thrust forward and a chain exploded from her palm, wrapping around a tree, before she retracted the chakra construct, pulling her to the shore and avoiding the dangerous electrified water. Kushina twisted in midair and stuck herself to the side of the tree. Naruto just looked at her with a smile on his face. Kushina had done well, Naruto noted. Even throughout their impromptu sparring session, not even once had the spheres of water on the back of her hands lost their shape or faltered. Now the blonde would be the first to admit that he never really had the chakra control for the Rasengan. So he had to come up with his own ways of forming the attack, but honestly his way of using the Kage Bunshin was a joke. Oh sure, it was inventive, but the Rasengan was a short-range jutsu. Also, unlike the Chidori, it was not one that relied on sheer speed to make up for the fact the opponent knew you had to get in close. Of course, actually using that speed required a Sharingan to combat the tunnel vision, but that was beside the point. The massive amount of speed used by a Chidori user made it far more difficult for the opponent to block or dodge, despite the fact the user had to get in close. The Rasengan, however, did not make use of a speed-style attack, and that meant that to truly use the attack to its fullest potential, one had to be able to form the Rasengan almost instantly, so that the opponent would not be able to dodge the technique as the user was already in too close to be dodged. That was why Naruto had forced Kushina to learn chakra control so much and pushed her more than the other two when it came to the subject. Jiraiya's way of training him simply threw chakra control out the window. After all, who needs control when you had all the chakra in the world? That approach did have its upsides, Naruto would not deny that, but it was also this approach that stopped him from using the Rasengan to its full potential for so long. There was also the fact that unlike Naruto, who while he disliked having to use Akane's chakra at first, he was willing to use it. From what Akane had told him about his mother, Kushina hated her with a passion and would never, or at least very rarely, use her chakra by choice. That made chakra control even more important for the redhead, since she would not have a bottomless well of chakra to draw on, unlike Naruto himself. Naruto clapped for his student. Good work, Kushi-chan. That's all the chakra control you have to do for now. The blonde stated, smiling at the redhead, which caused her to gain a faint dusting of a crimson blush on her cheeks from being called Kushi-chan by the blonde. Kushina let the water spheres drop, the resulting splash soaking the ground near the bottom of her tree. The redhead jumped down and walked in front of Naruto. So how'd I do, sensei? Kushina asked. Naruto smiled in return. You did great, Kushina. In fact, you did so well that I think I can start teaching you something really awesome. Naruto said, smiling at the redhead. Kushina in turn looked up at him with a little confusion. What kind of awesome thing, sensei? Naruto smiled and touched the tree next to the redhead. Watch close, okay? Naruto took a deep breath and pulled his right hand back, before trusting it forward, palm facing the tree. The spinning blue orb of chakra formed half a second before Naruto's palm impacted the tree, ripping through the bark and wood like a hot knife through butter. Leaving a hole in the tree, Naruto turned back to Kushina, who was looking at the blonde with a slight bit of awe. Well then, Kushi-chan, think you're ready to learn the Rasengan? Naruto asked, smirking. Kushina's eyes were so wide that they looked like they were about to fall out of her head. Before she pumped her fist into the air, grinning like she had just won the lottery or been elected as the first female Hokage. Hell yeah, Kushina declared, smiling up at her sensei, who gave her one of his signature fox-like grins and a quick thumbs up in return. Kushina would admit that the blonde had become a little like family to the team of three genin. He was always willing to take time out of his day to help them improve or even just to talk. Hell, Kushina could remember when she found out that Naruto lived on the floor above her. She had gotten bored the next day and decided to go upstairs to see if the blonde wanted to do something. When Kushina went inside Naruto's apartment, Naoki was already there. Naruto and Naoki had been playing cards and talking. The Senju heir had told Kushina that was because both of them were just bored. Tsunade was out that particular day and Naoki needed help with a technique, so the Senju had taken a walk. Naruto had saw him and helped out, and one thing led to another until they were playing poker while discussing the finer points of jutsu usage in a combat situation. Since then every now and then Kushina, Makoto and Nakai would drop over to their blonde sensei's place. Naruto was always happy to have them. Hell, it wasn't uncommon for the three genin to spend an entire Sunday inside the blonde's apartment. Sunday was, as Naruto had dictated to them, their relaxation and team bonding day. If they wanted to spend that day inside the apartment talking or watching a movie or something, the blonde never seemed to mind. There were even signs that Naruto's apartment was being taken over by three genin. It wasn't anything major. Just a few scrolls of kunai and shuriken here and there, a movie or two from the genin lying around the blonde's home, a jacket or some other piece of clothing that was not Naruto's hanging off the back of a chair. The blonde never really seemed to mind. If anything, he seemed to enjoy the genin's visits. Kushina's head got taken forcefully out of the clouds when a water balloon impacted with the side of her head, not bursting but definitely attracting Kushina's attention. Naruto smiled, throwing another balloon up and down in his left hand. Now that I have your attention. XXX. The next month passed in a haze of exhaustion and pain for the three genin. Naruto pushed them to master their new techniques relentlessly. They no longer had off days to train with family or just kick back on. No, even the three genin's off time was swallowed by Naruto's relentless training. He pushed Makoto harder to be faster and faster. Her speed would be the deciding factor in any fight that the Chidori was used in. Naruto did not focus on other jutsu, only on having Makoto perform and execute the Chidori. Once the Uchiha genin could do that, Naruto pushed her to form it faster and using less hand seals, in addition to bringing Makoto's speed up. Naruto was impressed when Makoto rose to the challenge and then exceeded his expectations. Now the young Uchiha was no Rock Lee when it came to speed, but when Naruto considered it, who really was? But she was fast. Very, very fast. If Naruto was to give a rough estimate on Makoto's speed, the blonde would call her a mid-chunin, but for brief bursts she could push herself to high chunin. That sprint was what Naruto wanted Makoto to use when executing the Chidori. The blonde had toyed with the idea of teaching Makoto other forms of the Chidori but decided against it. The Chidori consisted of a series of 12 hand signs. Naruto could cut that down to 3. As far as Naruto knew, it was impossible to go any lower. At least he had never seen Kakashi or that bastard Sasuke go any lower than that. Though the blonde did admit that it was theoretically possible. But even if she wasn't able to cut it down to 3 hand seals, Makoto was more than passable. The young Uchiha had cut the hand seals down to 9. That was better than Sasuke was at her age. More importantly, Makoto could use the Chidori 3 times in a day, one more than Sasuke could at her age. Naruto felt like doing a happy dance when he found that out. When he met Sasuke in the fiery depths of hell, he would be able to say that he, Namikaze-Uzumaki Naruto, had trained Sasuke's own mother to be better than him. That was going to be a special kind of revenge. All in all, Naruto was more than happy with Makoto's progress. She was more or less the genin's team leader as well. Her level-headed thinking making up for her teammates' impulsiveness. For Naoki, Naruto had punished the young Senju mercilessly. The Senju, like Kushina, had shown a decent ability to work with a blade, but it was overshadowed by his ability with nin and taijutsu. Naoki did express an interest in combining his ninjutsu with kenjutsu, in order to create a new, more versatile form he could fight with. So Naruto taught Naoki how to use hook swords. They were not what one would call common, and so not many people knew how to use them. Fewer knew how to fight against them. Something Naruto could say he knew personally due to his little encounter with Kurosaki Raiga. The Kiba were a form of hook sword after all. Naruto had crammed everything he could into the young Senju, focusing on his kenjutsu and the creation of chakra strings mainly. Naoki would need the chakra strings for the trump card that Naruto wanted to impart to him. Unlike the Chidori or the Rasengan, this attack truly was his own technique. It was also probably the only jutsu in the world that could be listed as an E or an S-ranked jutsu. The effectiveness it had really depended on the user, but Naruto was still very impressed with Naoki's progress with Naruto's personal Kaden technique, Kaden, Bakuinjin. Add to that some extra lessons on both ninjutsu and taijutsu. And the Senju was a force to be reckoned with. More importantly, it should be more than enough to completely decimate any of the opponents that Naoki could face in the Chunin exams. Though what Naruto really wanted to see was Naoki vs anyone from Tsunade's genin team. Naruto was sure that the Senju heir would decimate them in short order. he just hoped he had a camera and Tsunade was around when it happened. Seeing Nawaki show he was far more powerful than he let on, and seeing Tsunade's reaction to it would be like Christmas coming early to the blonde. Finally there was Kushina. Naruto had, quite literally, pounded everything he knew into the girl. From combat tactics to Kenjutsu and finally the Rasengan, it had taken 3.5 weeks for Kushina to be able to form the Rasengan correctly, e.g. the attack not blowing up in her face. But the girl did manage it. The last few days were spent on Naruto giving Kushina advice on how to create the Rasengan faster. The redhead was currently still at 6 seconds. Better than Naruto was at her age with the use of his clones, and the blonde told her as much, but still not fast enough. That being said, Kushina had one advantage Naruto didn't: chakra chains, by making use of the chain's ability to hold down her opponent. Kushina could keep them from moving enough that it made the time it took her to form the Rasengan mean less. Naruto was also pleased to note that Kushina could fight with the best genins Kiri could offer when it came to Kenjutsu. The red head was a little on the short side to fight with Naruto's favored weapon, an Okatana, so the Narukami had to improvise. Kushina now fought using 3 weapons. 2 wakizashis for indoor fighting or up-close and personal work, and a single katana. Thankfully the normal katana's length was short enough that Kushina could use it without a problem, though until she grew a bit more the wakizashis would be her better weapons. Kushina's ninjutsu was nothing special, but he knew that would probably never change. Besides, Kushina was only really bad with jutsu that took a lot of hand seals. So as long as Naruto kept it to shape and nature manipulations, the redhead would never have any real problems. Which was a good thing considering that shape and nature manipulation were something he was very good at. Add to that, most of the skills that Naruto taught to Kushina regarding the wakizashi and the katana were directly from the samurai of Tetsu no Kuni, and the samurai didn't use hand seals, only shape and nature manipulation. You had a sword style that was almost tailor-made for Uzumaki Kushina, much like Mifune had once told Naruto that the samurai sword style seemed to fit him like few others. The blonde made a mental note to visit Tetsu to speak with Mifune. It would be good if he could convince the old samurai to teach his genin a few things. Naruto was not sure if Mifune would agree or not, but the old man was always good like that. It would probably end up being some kind of trade-off really. Most likely Mifune would agree to teach his genin in exchange for Naruto performing a few services for Tetsu no Kuni, and honestly Naruto would be happy to help. Tetsu was a fine country, one that never needlessly antagonized others, and the samurai had a strict sense of honor and loyalty. There was something Naruto could respect about that. Moreover, he owed Mifune more than he could repay. Even if the old man in this dimension didn't know that, Naruto would still do his best to pay back that debt that he felt he still owed even now, despite Mifune telling him that there was no debt to repay. XXX. Naruto sighed. How did this happen again? The blonde looked down again, at Kushina and Makoto sleeping on his chest. Now the blonde knew for a fact that the 3 of them still had all their clothes on. Well, that was one theory out the window. And a theory Naruto was quite glad to be rid of. They were 13 for Kami's sake. If Naruto had done that with Makoto or Kushina, he would have felt like a cradle robber. The blonde looked to his right. Nawaki was passed out and sleeping on the couch. The blonde sighed and looked up at his ceiling. That was correct, all 4 members of Team 5 were inside Naruto's apartment. Yesterday marked the last day of training for the 3 genin. Not that Naruto had a choice but to stop, as the Chunin exams started the day after. It was their old rest day anyway, so Naruto gave them the Sunday off. The 3 genin decided to use it as a team bonding day, as Naruto had forbade them from practicing any form of the ninja arts for the day. The day had been interesting for the blonde as he simply let the genin pull him around, though Naruto did feel saddened by the fact that Ichiraku Ramen hadn't opened yet. Naruto put that on his list of things to do: invest in Ichiraku Ramen when it opened. At least Naruto hoped it would open. The blonde had no idea what he would do if the delectable ramen of Ichiraku was taken away from him forever. Naruto made another mental note to get to Tetsu no Kuni as fast as possible. The only ramen stand that rivaled Chuki's godlike ramen was there. The 3 genin had pulled him off to lunch first, the 3 fighting over where they would eat. Naruto bopped all 3 of them on the head and took them to the Golden Leaf, arguably the best restaurant in Konoha. Before telling the 3 genin to go nuts, Naruto would foot the bill for them today. They deserved that much for surviving his brutal training. Well, that in Naruto got a feeling that the only reason Tsunade hadn't tried to kill him yet was Naoki misdirecting her. God bless the Senju's soul for that. Besides, Naruto was starting to see each member of Team 5 as his family. Naruto had no problem in treating family to lunch, even if it was outrageously expensive lunch. Following that, both Naoki and he were dragged around for a Makoto-induced shopping spree. Fortunately for the two males, Makoto was a kunoichi. So they were mostly spared a clothing-induced hell and instead ended up spending time browsing ninja stores for things like shuriken, kunai, and other wonderful things capable of stabbing or exploding. Though Naruto did tell his entire genin team not to purchase any explosive notes, Naruto was no seal master but was far, far above average. The blonde could easily make explosive notes for them. In fact, he actually ended up giving them around 100 each, his own special brand of explosive notes. Same size, 10 times the bang. What could Naruto say? When it came to explosions, any Uzumaki worth their salt knew one thing: size matters. Kushina declared that she wanted to relax after their little impromptu shopping trip, so they dumped everything inside Naruto's apartment before heading to the hot springs, but not before Naruto set a barrier over the women's side. Even if he would never admit it, Naruto thought of Jiraiya as a father. So he put the barrier up for the old pervert's benefit. If anyone tried peeking, it would look like the woman's side was filled with fat old ladies. This was better for Jiraiya than the alternative. After all, Naruto would hate to have to beat his father figure to death for peeking on his students. Still, he could only do that if he got to the man before Kushina and Makoto. Actually, now Naruto thought about it, maybe he should let Jiraiya get himself caught. It would be interesting to find out what a Rasengan did to the male reproductive system, and he was sure that if Jiraiya was caught peeking on her, Kushina would show him exactly what would happen when the Rasengan was applied directly to Jiraiya's balls. The end of the day was spent with the four of them watching movies in Naruto's apartment, and eating takeout ramen. They must have fallen asleep while doing that. Naruto looked down again and smiled at the content looks on Kushina and Makoto's faces. Naruto yawned and looked at the clock. 10 am. They didn't need to be at the academy until 3, but there was no guarantee that Naruto or any of his students would wake up on time if the blonde went back to sleep. Naruto sighed. This was going to be a long morning. He shook Kushina awake. The redhead looked at him groggily. Huh. Naruto-sensei. What are you doing in my room? Naruto chuckled nervously. Kushina, this is my apartment and you're kind of sleeping on me. Would you mind getting off, please? Naruto asked. Kushina looked down at where she was before looking back at Naruto, then looking down again and going a red so bright it put her hair to shame. The remainder of the occupants of the apartment, and the apartment block, were woken by an embarrassed scream from Kushina, followed by one from Makoto with the sound of Naoki's hysterical laughter in the background. Naruto sighed while cooking breakfast for 4. Kushina was currently using his shower while Naoki waited for his turn and Makoto was helping him by making pancake batter. How had this happened? When he woke his team up, Naruto had expected them all to go home, then he would meet them again for the Chunin exams in a few hours. That, needless to say, had not happened, the three all opting to stay at his apartment and get ready there. Naruto's argument that they needed to go get clothes and more importantly more equipment such as ration bars, kunai, etc. was shut down when Kushina revealed that the three had been stashing things like that in Naruto's apartment for months now. In a bunch of storage scrolls in his spare room, in a wardrobe he didn't know he even had, containing clothing Naruto knew was not his. How the hell did he miss them bringing a wardrobe into his apartment? And putting storage scrolls and clothing in it as well? He was an S-rank ninja kami, damn it. He should pick up on things like this. He must have been slipping. A thought like that did not sit well with Naruto. The three genin rushed out of the apartment after breakfast, not bothering to help Naruto wash up and sprinting over to the academy. Naruto checked the time. It was 1 p.m., and the blonde started doing the math in his head. If they walked, and they probably would, then it would take between 30 and 40 minutes to get to the academy. Naruto sighed and looked at the dishes, then made the infamous cross-shaped hand sign. Kage Bunshin, Narukami, Naruto's answer to all forms of menial labor. The original sat down on his couch, formerly Naoki's bed, and looked both ways before unsealing an orange book and reading, a perverted giggle escaping his lips every now and then. Naruto checked the clock. It was almost 2, and the blonde stood and placed his hands together. Naruto threw a quick look over his shoulder at the still cleaning clones. Lock the door before you pop. He got a chorus of "Hi" from the 2 clones before leaving for the academy in a shunshin, a flash of lighting accompanying Naruto's exit. The blonde found himself standing in the hall before the exam room. Naruto spread out his awareness, looking for his genin's chakra. The blonde sighed. It seemed they were coming to him. Naruto looked up as Kushina came into view and gave a lazy wave. Huh, what are you doing here, sensei? Naoki asked as he came into view. Naruto smiled at them. The 3 of them were ready, they were going to ace this. Also no invasion for them, so at least they would be allowed to become Chunin. Just some last-minute advice, Naoki-kun. Naruto said, smiling at the 3, before nodding to himself and focusing on Makoto. Makoto-chan, you are, in a way, this team's leader. You're level-headed and can analyze a situation quickly and efficiently. It helps you're not too impulsive as well. Keep a level head, stay focused and keep these 2 from going off the deep end and you should all be fine. When it comes to battle, Makoto-chan, I have only one thing to say, let none match your speed. Naruto smiled at the raven-haired girl who beamed up at him. Naruto turned his attention to Naoki. Naoki-kun, you're the team's all-rounder. You can handle just about any situation you come across because you're good at everything. That being said, right now I want you to leave using the swords as a last resort, have something to surprise the opponent with in round 3, okay? Other than that, your chakra is far above what a genin's should be. If worse comes to worst, you should be able to outlast the opponent. Naoki nodded at Naruto and placed his hand on the scroll that contained his swords. Kushina, you're the team's powerhouse. Your chakra is the highest out of all 3 of you, and with the amount of power you have at your disposal, you shouldn't have a problem bulldozing through the opposition if you need to. Just remember that finesse has its place and to make use of it. Other than that, don't use your wakizashis or your katana unless you don't have another choice. Keep something as a trump card, besides the other thing. Kushina nodded and Naruto took one last look at his team. Final words of advice: stick by each other and work as a team. Remember always, those that break the rules are trash. But those that abandon their comrades are worse than trash. Naruto turned and opened the door to the exam room. Kick their asses hard. Naruto finished smiling. The 3 genin gave grins so bloodthirsty that it would give Kisame a run for his money. Hi, Naruto-sensei. Naruto's smiling expression fell off his face the moment his genin were through the exam doors. The Uzu-Nin Jonin channeled some of his chakra into the seal of his wrist, Okatana dropping into his waiting hand. Naruto took a deep breath. He had felt them when he spread his awareness out, chakra signatures that should not be here. Thanks to Akane's ability to sense hatred, Naruto was able to tell a lot of things about a person just by feeling their chakra. The chakra he had felt from these people was cold, almost robot-like, emotionless. They were feelings he had got in his own dimension from only one sect of Shinobi, Root. The blonde then disappeared in a burst of speed. It was time to find out what that damn war hawk wanted from the Chunin exams. They had already tried to abduct Kushina once before and Naruto was not letting that happen again. Naruto dropped soundlessly behind the Root ninja, his vantage point directly overlooking the examinee's room. Naruto saw the name mark in the ANBU's mask and the Okatana stabbed forward, severing the man's spine, while in 5 other locations his cage bunchins did the same, well, almost all of them, except one who merely knocked the ninja out. Naruto wanted to present the man to the Sandaime. It would get the old man on Danzo's case and hopefully make the old fool think twice about his movements. The last thing Naruto needed was Danzo screwing up his genin's chances. The blonde leaned down and sealed the body in a storage scroll before jumping off. He needed to get to the Jonin sensei's room before anyone started to get suspicious. Naruto made another cage bunchin as he jumped, handing the clone the scroll with orders to get it to the old monkey. A shunshin later, Naruto was standing outside the Jonin sensei's waiting room. The blonde yawned as he walked inside. It was plain, a lot seats and a projector screen of the goings-on in the examination room. Naruto yawned again before looking over the Jonin inside the room. There were a little over 100 of them, and he spotted Jiraiya and Tsunade easily enough, as well as an Uchiha that he didn't know. That being said, the man did look like he had a stick shoved so far up his ass Naruto would have needed a miner's license to remove the damn thing. The blonde's eyes kept moving. 4 from Suna, 6 from Aim, 4 from Kiri, 8 from Kumo, 3 from Iwa. That old bastard Onoki had balls of solid fucking titanium to send his genin to Konoha after the stunt he tried to pull. Naruto could see 2 from Taki, a few more villages that Naruto didn't recognize. Naruto couldn't see any from Uzu, but that was to be expected, even if Naruto had driven Iwa off. The fact remained that they had attacked Uzu. The Uzukage probably didn't want to risk even a single Jonin being outside Uzu right now. Though when Kushina made it to the finals, Naruto was sure that Dad would make the trip to see her. In fact, he actually knew Dad would be making the trip even if Kushina didn't make it, but still he hadn't told the girl that. Let it be a surprise for her. Naruto gave Jiraiya a lazy wave as he sat down, getting a nod from the white-haired man, who in return walked over to the blonde. You got some balls, kid, putting your team in the exam with only 6 months training. Jiraiya said with a smile before turning serious. You think they're ready? Jiraiya asked. The man sounded genuinely concerned. If that was because Tsunade was worried about Nakai or because Minato already had a crush on Kushina, Naruto wasn't sure. Moreover, he wasn't sure he cared. You've only had 6 months to train your team as well, Jiraiya-san. Why didn't you give them more time? Naruto asked. Jiraiya shrugged before sitting down next to the blonde. True, the white-haired man admitted. That being said, Minato and Hiashi are geniuses in their own right, and Sum isn't that far behind them in terms of skill. Hell, they even managed to complete AC rank with no support from me. Hey, now that was a good mission. All I had to do was sit back and let the genin do all the heavy lifting. Jiraiya finished. Naruto smirked inside his head. So Jiraiya wanted to compare mission records, did he? Too bad for the white-haired man. Naruto knew for a fact that his team had completed the most C ranks. How many missions has your team done so far, Jiraiya-san? Naruto asked. The white-haired man puffed up his chest proudly. 32 D ranks and 4 C ranks, Jiraiya declared proudly. Tsunade edged her way closer. Naruto smiled. Well, my team has the advantage then, Jiraiya-san. So far we have completed 13 C rank missions, no D ranks. Jiraiya's jaw acquainted itself firmly with the floor. The hell? You know you can't even take a C rank without completing 20 D ranks first, right? The white-haired man asked. Naruto just shrugged back to him. Actually you can, it's just recommended that you don't. The blonde corrected his older companion, who just looked like someone had stabbed him. Don't you think that's just a little irresponsible? Jiraiya asked. Naruto had to stifle his laughter. Yes, the great toad sage Jiraiya, the man who threw him down a cliff with nothing but the hope he might be able to summon up some of Akane's chakra, was talking to him about responsibility. The Godfather part notwithstanding, the blonde was still a little pissed from when he found that out after all. Not really. I knew their limits and their strengths and weaknesses, they were ready for it. Naruto replied. Jiraiya, however, looked unconvinced. Still, I think you. Naruto chose to cut him off there. Jiraiya-san, do you train Team 5? Naruto asked. Jiraiya looked at him like he was insane. No, of course not, I am the sensei of Team 7. The white-haired man replied, looking a little lost at Naruto's line of questioning. Okay then, have you even seen Team 5 training or watched them spar with each other? Jiraiya shook his head. Naruto sighed. Then why are you questioning my methods? I know what they are capable of because I did train them. I have taught them a lot, from the ground up in some cases. Jiraiya, I do understand that you are doing this out of concern for the genin. I thank you for that, I really do. But I know they can do this, so please, until you can come up with a decent reason for me to keep them out of the exams, then please keep quiet. The white-haired man nodded and sighed. I just hope you know what you're doing. Jiraiya said to the blonde. Naruto nodded and turned his attention to the screen. He wondered what they were going to do for the first test. XXX. Kushina stopped as they entered the examination room. The redhead counted at least 50 different teams. But from what she had been able to gather about the exam in the final round, it was a one-on-one tournament-style matchup. One that was held over only one day, so that meant that there could only be around a maximum of 20 matches that day. Since the tournament had to end the same day it started, there could be no more than 12 participants of the final round. That meant that the first 2 tests would cut down the numbers heavily. Kushina looked around. Battlefield tactics had been beaten into her by her sensei, and right now they were telling her to identify who had the best chance of making it to the final rounds. Kushina chose to focus on the Konoha teams. She did know the most about them after all. First up, Team 7. She looked closely. Namikaze Minato, Hyuga Hiyashi and Inuzuka Sume. They would be in the final round. The redhead was no fool. Minato was a genius, she wouldn't deny that. Couple that with the visual abilities of the Byakugan allowing them to know where the team's enemies were coming from, and Sume's Inuzuka traits, the team would be almost impossible to take by surprise. In fact, most times their enemy tried to ambush them would likely be turned back on the attackers. With Minato's brain for combat and skill at the futon techniques of the Namikaze clan, Hiyashi's skill with the Juken and Sume's skill with the Inuzuka taijutsu style, the ambushers would quickly find themselves torn apart. The redhead made sure to remember that in case she faced them in the exams, just because they may look like an easy target most likely meant they were setting a trap. Next up, Team 4, Uchiha Tayaki, Junichi Amy and Kon. They weren't really much. A medical corps team. She had Naoki do some research on them. None could use Tsunade's strength, but all had fine control over chakra scalpels. Add to that, Makoto had told her that Tayaki had activated his Sharingan, one tome in his right eye, two in his left. The only other information Makoto had been able to dig up about him was that he had above average control of the Uchiha clan's favored Kaden, Gokaku no Jutsu. The Uchiha was apparently able to use it as both an orb of flames and concentrated stream like a flamethrower. Junichi Amy was a member of the Genjutsu using Kurama clan. Though she was a branch member from a small side family, apparently like the Sharingan, she could place a person under a Genjutsu just by looking them in the eyes. Finally, Kon. According to Academy records, above average taijutsu, above average ninjutsu and below average ninjutsu due to small chakra reserves. His smaller reserves afforded him greater control, and with above average taijutsu and chakra scalpels, Kushina would have to be on guard. The best way of fighting against the medical team would be from long range, failing that would be weapons. With chakra scalpels it would be beyond foolish to engage them in straight taijutsu. Third and final team of Konoha that could make it to the finals was Team 13, Uchiha Fugaku, Aburame Shibi and finally Akamichi Shomei. Kushina did wonder briefly where Shikaku, Choza and Inoichi were, but quickly discarded the thought. Their sensei probably wanted them to gain more experience first before sending them into the exams. At any rate, she knew Fugaku's abilities back to front thanks to Makoto. Shibi was an Aburame, so he was most likely one of the best trackers in the room, and finally Shomei. Well, the man was an Akamichi, so it was a given he could use his clan's multi-size techniques. Probably very good at taijutsu. They would need to watch themselves should they need to take the fight up close and personal. Kushina sighed and wondered if they did preliminary rounds, because if she was right in thinking that her own team along with these three got to the finals, then they may well need them. Especially with some of the other genin she could see. Still, this was going to be fun. After all, the training they were put through was hell. Compared to what's already happened, this should be a walk in the park. She shook that thought out of her head. Naruto had beaten the fact that overconfidence got you killed into her. Makoto leaned in. Anyone we should look out for? Kushina shook her head. Nope, only the ones we talked about earlier. The others are no real threat. But as for the other villages, I don't even know where to start. The Konoha teams are a definite, though we need to keep an eye out for them. Makoto nodded, before looking at Kushina again. Do you think they are going to come after us? The raven-haired beauty asked, her head inclining slightly toward Team 7. Kushina bit her lip. It had been a long time after all, hopeful it was over with by now. At least she hoped it was over. Clans could hold a grudge like no others though. I don't know, but if Minato did want to embarrass me, then he would wait for the third round. Makoto nodded and turned to Naoki to relay Kushina's predictions. The reason why Namikaze Minato may have wanted to embarrass Kushina was quite simple. She had, in a way, insulted the Namikaze clan and its heir, e.g. him. In a little bit of a power play politically, the Namikaze had sent a marriage proposal to her father, the current Uzumaki clan head, trying to betroth Minato and her in a marriage, a political byplay of course. It was the Namikaze's bid to try and gain more power in Konoha and a foothold in Uzu. Dat had asked her opinion on the matter and Kushina had flat out refused. Of course Kushina had nothing against Minato as a person, but she was not about to say she was willing to spend the rest of her life with him without getting to know him first. So the marriage proposal was turned down, as the Namikaze were unwilling to wait. Kushina wasn't even aware if Minato had known about it, as it was not uncommon for clans to marry their children off without consulting them first. But as the redhead had never really talked to the blonde, even after turning the proposal down, she was unsure if he felt slighted or not. If Minato did feel slighted by her, then there was a good chance he would try and get back at her in the exam. Though Kushina did doubt that a little. After all, the boy had never shown signs of trying anything in the past, even if he was a little cold to her, still it was nothing that wasn't expected. At any rate, she had more important things to dwell on. Kushina went back to observing the other genin. Someone was bound to do something stupid and give away an ability or two, and if not, watching two people beat each other senseless in a taijutsu match was always fun. XXX. Naruto smiled as he saw Kushina giving the teams a once-over, good girl. Checking some of the competition out and ranking them by threat level most likely. Hell, Naruto was doing it himself. So far he counted 3 teams from Konoha, 2 from Kiri, 1 from Kumo, 2 from Suna, 1 from AIM and 1 other that was possible from Iwa, that would make it to round 2, or to be more correct had the best chance of making it past round 2. Naruto did have to stifle a chuckle when he saw a younger B. It seemed he hadn't started rapping yet. Maybe Naruto could stop that before it started. An Anbu dropped down next to him, startling some of the Jonin. The boar-masked Anbu bowed to the seated blonde. Narukami-san, the Sandame would like to see you in his office if you wouldn't mind. Naruto nodded. Sure, I'll be there shortly. Naruto hands came up into the ram hand seal as he used Shunshin. Disappearing in a flash of lightning, startling some of the more nervous Jonin and making Jiraiya's hair stand on end to end, from the static electricity discharged. Jiraiya sighed and placed his hand on his head, feeling the spikier than usual hair. I bet he did that on purpose. Jiraiya grumbled. He wasn't wrong. Naruto appeared, already bowing before the Hokage. You called Sarutobi-sama. Naruto stated, eyes trained on the floor, exactly like an Anbu awaiting orders. Hiruzen looked at Naruto for a second before stating in an official tone. This is serious business right now, Naruto-san. I will have to ask you to refer to me as Hokage-sama for the duration of this meeting. Naruto nodded, acknowledging the request. Of course, Hokage-sama. What do you wish of me? Naruto asked, eyes still trained on the floor. Hiruzen took a deep breath in, before exhaling again. Jonin Narukami Naruto of Uzu-Nin no Sato, today at close to 1400 hours, were you responsible for the deaths of 5 root shinobi and the capture of 1, correct? Naruto nodded. You are correct, Hokage-sama. The Sarutobi nodded. Do you have any idea as to what these members were planning or what they were doing at their locations? No, Hokage-sama. All I knew was that they were operating illegally and need to be disposed of. I will admit the fact they have attacked my team in the past did have a bearing on my decision, but I still do believe my actions to be the correct ones. Hiruzen nodded and sighed. Then Jonin Narukami I, Sarutobi Hiruzen, Sandame Hokage of Konohagakure, hereby assign you this S-rank mission. Naruto nodded, indicating he was both willing and ready to accept. For the duration of the second exam inside Training Ground 44, you are to shadow Team 5. Should any shinobi, root or otherwise, attempt to abduct any member of Team 5 and leave the village with them, they are to be disposed of. I will trust you to know what is acceptable and unacceptable inside these parameters. Naruto nodded. Of course, Hokage-sama, I will be ready to start immediately. Naruto made another hand seal and used Shunshin to return to his apartment. He was going to need some supplies in case things went to shit fast. XXX. Nawaki was feeling restless. What the hell was taking so damn long? They had been waiting for 20 damn minutes already. The exam was to start at 3 p.m. or 1500 hours. It was now almost 3:20 and Nawaki was starting to get a little anxious. What the genin in the room didn't know was that the Jonin were deliberately not entering and waiting for a fight to break out, so that the tension would be at its peak for the test. Well, that and they were taking bets on how long it would take for the genin to start a fight with each other. Eventually, as predicted, someone did something stupid. In this case it was a few ninja from Taki insulting Hanzo in front of the AIM ninja. Bad move. The AIM ninja didn't bother retorting with words and opted to go straight to blades instead. The fight, if it could be called that, lasted exactly 3.5 seconds. The first move went to the aim genin drawing a ninjutsu, the second to the taki nin taking a defensive stance, and the third went to the chunin that knocked both of the unfortunate ninja unconscious. Nakai winced as he heard the two skulls connect with the ground, Kami that sounded painful. The chunin stood and looked at the 4 remaining teammates of the two. Take these 2 sacks of crap and get out. If they can't even follow simple instructions like wait, then they sure as hell aren't ready for chunin. Now get out. The 4 remaining team members went to argue and were summarily knocked unconscious by the chunin's companions. The man nodded to his 2 partners and turned to the assembled genin. Alright, listen up. This year's test is being hosted by the head of the T&I department. For anyone who's wondering, T&I stands for Torture and Interrogation, Morino Hibiki. As such, we will be watching you all closely. Be aware, the test is simple. Each team will be given a fragment of data to memorize. Then a member of each team will be chosen randomly. Members from an opposing team will proceed to interrogate each chosen person. Any and all forms of interrogation are allowed, but they must be alive when they come out, preferably with their limbs attached. The chunin stretched, reaching towards the heavens. As for why we will be watching you, it is quite simple. In the event that a team manages to extract the information but their team member that is being interrogated also cracks and the same happens to the other side, we will be deciding the tiebreaker based on our recorded observations. As you may have noticed, Hibiki-san is not in the room. He will be observing via special cameras set up throughout the rooms you will be assigned to, so don't worry too much, he will be watching. The man yawned. Oh, I almost forgot, my name's Yamanaka Fuin, and if you have any questions about the exam, please feel free to keep them to yourself because I will not be answering them. All the information you needed was given out in the explanation I gave not 5 minutes ago. Missed it? Well, that's just too fucking bad. Naoki looked at his 2 teammates who actually looked a little excited about the form their test took. Why Kami? Why did he always get the crazy ones? First his sister, then Makoto and Kushina, and most recently his sensei. Surely he deserved a break by now, right? The scrolls were given out. Naoki unrolled it and almost face-faulted. What the hell kind of secret message was that? Now Naoki had no proof, but he blamed Naruto for this, and by complete accident managed to lay the blame at the culprit's feet through sheer amount of experience. The message stated quite clearly. The ramen moves at dawn. What the hell did he do to deserve this? Naoki was a good boy. 3 guesses who I stole that from, and your first 2 guesses don't count. At any rate, he cursed his borderline certifiable sensei for this. Naoki cursed him most strongly and wished him some form of bodily harm. Kushina was on the other end of the emotional spectrum, completely overjoyed that someone, most likely her sensei with the way she saw him go through it, treated ramen so seriously. Ramen was a serious business after all. Naoki sighed and memorized the scroll before incinerating it with a quick and seal less low-ranked Kenjutsu. Fire was such a great element. All the possibilities for wide-scale destruction. Naoki pulled himself away from the thoughts of wide-scale fiery devastation, no matter how pleasing said thoughts may be. After all, who didn't love explosions? The Senju turned his attention back to the chunin who stood at the front of the room. Okay, maggots, your teams will be called on at random to be interrogated by another. At this time your little secret keeper will also be separated from you and taken to be, he gave a sadistic smile, talked to. Naoki shivered. Okay, now that was creepy. The 3 genin of Team 4 waited, and waited, and waited. They almost just wanted themselves to be called up, being interrogation damned. Just some action would be nice. However, the world is quite often a numbers game, and at the moment there were only 30 interrogation rooms. Each team was given a total of 20 minutes to extract the information. With 143 teams in the room it was going to take, and this was if all the teams used the entire 20 minutes, a grand total of around 2 hours. Okay, so it really wasn't that long, but it didn't matter. They were going crazy from the inactivity. Finally their turn arrived. The chunin smiled. Sure, it was creepy, but it was no Narukami Naruto manic laugh while yelling about youth or throwing exploding model cows at you, so the genin were relatively unaffected. Though all did collectively shiver at the memory, they just hoped that time would dull the horror, or they saw something that managed to repress the memory, whatever came first. The man did seem a little put out that they were unaffected by his smile but quickly shrugged it off. Okay girlies, you're the interrogators to these little tacky ninja. The chunin made a quick gesture off to the side. Senju, you're a punching bag, get inside. Naoki felt his head snap back from the force of the punch and smiled. He would never say it out loud for fear of encouraging the man, but he would admit, privately, that he was glad for the body conditioning they had been put through. Compared to being hit by his sensei, the punches the Taki ninja were throwing felt like love taps. Naoki channeled his chakra to his fingers. He was being held by rope, bound hand and foot. He could work with this. Using the utmost care, the Senju crafted a chakra string made completely out of Kaden nature chakra. Before using it to slice through his bonds, but left them looking as if he was still bound, element of surprise and all that. The Taki nin punched out again. This time Naoki moved. The Senju pushed his body forward just under the punch and stuck the Taki nin in the family pride. The boy doubled over in pain and Naoki's knee met the genin's face. The Senju vaulted off the ninja's back and closed grappling with the other. Naoki twisted bring the Taki genin to the floor before punching him in the face, breaking the cartilage in his nose before slamming his head into the concrete knocking him unconscious. The Senju stood and dusted himself off and spat out some blood before knocking lightly on the door. The door swung open revealing a bored-looking Chunin. Done already Sen, was as far as he got before Naoki walked out of the room leaving behind the two injured Taki nin. The Chunin looked after the boy for a second before looking into the room and seeing the downed ninja. Well, that's a first. The Chunin admitted before calling over another team. XXX. Naruto landed inside his apartment. It looked like for the first time in a long time he would have to take something seriously. Naruto shrugged out of his casual clothing and walked into his room. It was a fairly Spartan affair, a simple bed and wardrobe with a small desk and chair in the corner. At least that was all Naruto allowed most people to see. Even his genin had no idea just how much of an armory the room really was. The blonde whipped a kwani out and cut his hand and placed it on a seemingly normal part of the wall. Kai, the blonde declared. Black lines in interlocking spirals wormed their way across all four walls of the room, the window being placed under a funinjutsu barrier to prevent anyone seeing in. The black lines layered themselves one atop another, forming a complex and interlocking pattern that made one amazed at their very intricacy. There was a small blast of smoke and the bare four walls had been replaced, each wall now housing rows upon rows of weapons. Hundreds of kunai and shuriken, exploding tags, ninja wire, barrier tags, razor wire, garrote wire, tantos, wakizashis, kodachis, katanas, okatanas, scimitars, arrows, bows, armor of varying sizes and designs, throwing knives, hidden blades, poisons, paralyzing potions, healing elixirs. The room quite literally stocked everything Naruto could ever need when it came to weaponry. The blonde sauntered over to an armor display rack and quickly donned the suit. Mottled gray pants with a shirt, a thick cloak for obscuring his face and physical features, a pair of black combat boots and finally a pair of fingerless Anbu issue gloves on his hands. Next came his weapons. Naruto decided that safe was far better than sorry and as such the blonde packed like he was preparing for war. Hidden blade on each arm, 24 throwing knives in easy reach. A pair of hook swords strapped to his back, wakizashi on his hip, a chikudo joining it. A few hundred kwani and shuriken stored in seals over his body, along with his okatana and some explosive notes. Naruto sighed and picked up a bottle of black hair dye. Naruto shuddered. Black hair, and he would probably have to make it straight hair in order to avoid more suspicion. He would look a little like an Uchiha. Dear sweet Kami, he hoped those little bastards appreciated this. XXX. Mikado yawned and waited for the last few teams to finish their interrogation test. Getting the info out of the Taki nin they had been assigned hadn't been very hard. Then again, she did have the prank princess from Hell Uzumaki Kushina on her side, along with the inherited sadism that came from being the student of Narukami Naruto. A few threats here, a couple of Raiden-enhanced finger strikes to the genin's family pride, and the Taki nin folded like wet paper. Ah, memories. Naoki had walked out of the interrogation room not too long after they had finished. Kushina and Makoto hadn't even entertained the idea he had given up information. The three genin yawned. This was boring. Really, really, boring. Kushina scanned the room again. 114 or thereabout had started, so this test would cut them in half right down to 57. That was for the better. It was the next test that worried her. It would have to cut the participants down to acceptable levels, which meant it would have to be far harder than the previous ones. The Chunin exam proctor Fuin walked back to the front of the room. Congratulations, you have passed the first stage of the Chunin exams. Now I'll introduce you to your second exam proctor, Orochimaru. Fuin finished standing aside. A hissing serpent rose from the ground baring its fangs at the genin. Before seemingly throwing up, convulsions started along the snake's length as it regurgitated a body, covered in its juices. Orochimaru stood and wiped off the snake venom, much to the disgust of the surrounding genin. Such cute little children, Orochimaru said, licking his lips, slitted yellow eyes looking over the assembled genin. All of Team 5 shivered at the way he said that. Now then, you my cute little children have 40 minutes to make it to training ground 44 or you will be disqualified from the exams. Now run along, my cute little genins. Orochimaru gestured for the genin to leave and they did. In fact, they sprinted all the way to training ground 44. Fuin looked at Orochimaru with a smile. Was freaking them out like that really necessary? The Yamanaka questioned. Orochimaru shrugged. Not really, no. Damned if it wasn't fun though. Quote. XXX. Naruto grunted as he parried another slash from one of the root members. Naruto had already entered the forest of death and was waiting for his team. Until he had felt the chakra of the root shinobi, then he started hunting them down. Danzo had made this personal when he had tried abducting Kushina all those months ago. Now that Naruto had free reign to fight Root, provided he looked after Team 5 at the same time, the blonde planned on engaging in a private war against that bastard of a war hawk. Still, he only had the second exam to do so and Danzo only had a limited amount of root anbu, so he was going to run out sooner or later. Too bad. The blonde jumped back to avoid the Kenjutsu that smashed against the ground in front of him. Naruto smiled. It was 1 against 5, and oh boy did you have to feel sorry for those root members. The 5 masked shinobi circled him slowly. Ninjatus held at the ready. Naruto sheathed his own hook swords in one fluid movement. The blonde, turned black-haired, shinobi took a deep breath. He had no idea if this was going to work, and after all it was just a trick he had picked up from Kami, rest his soul. Naruto had never had time to learn more than the theory of the attack, but the blonde was willing to bet what he did know would be enough for the 5 in front of him. Raiden chakra circled his fists and feet but no further. Naruto couldn't keep the viscous grin from his face. It was no Raiden no Yoroi, but it was a start. The differences in the techniques were obvious to Naruto. According to by utilizing Raiden no Yoroi you gained increased speed and power. Adding to this, by utilizing Raiden chakra to speed up one's natural synapses, it also increases one's reaction speed tremendously. Not only that, but because the Raiden chakra was circling your body, it acted exactly like its name stated, like armor. Adding a defensive property to the jutsu, it really was an incredible technique. Naruto's version of it, at least at the moment, was a pale imitation at best. His Raiden chakra was only coating his fists and feet. It would increase his speed and strength but not to the levels of the true Raiden no Yoroi. He still had a long way to go when it came to that. Naruto flicked out of the ANBU's sight, leaving a trail of sparks behind him, before appearing before the lead root Anbu and letting his fist connect with the man's face. The Raiden chakra enhanced punch caved the man's skull in and pulverized his brain, turning it into mush and killing the root member instantly. The blonde blurred out of sight again, a pained yell and the sound of snapping alerting the remaining 4 root to his presence. The 3 spun around to find the blonde with his arm buried up to his elbow in their teammate's torso. The blonde blurred again, his fist coming back as he landed in front of another root member who brought his ninjutsu up in a pitiful defense. Naruto's fist came forward, and the Raiden chakra around it phased out of existence. Naruto's eyes widened and he twisted his arm, only gaining a small cut instead of a large gash. The Uzumaki channeled chakra into a seal on his left wrist, a kunai falling into his waiting hand. Futon nature chakra coating it instantly, the blade came up, slicing through the ninjutsu before taking the root ninja's head off. Naruto jumped away from his latest kill and faced the remaining 2 root members. It seemed as if he couldn't keep up even his partial Raiden no Yoroi for more than a few seconds before it failed on him. It seemed he would need to practice more with it. His right hand moved, unsheathing the Chikudo on his hip and holding it in a backhanded grasp. Naruto channeled his Futon chakra into the blade, giving it a sharp ocean blue outline. He charged the remaining 2 root Anbu, ducking low under the first cut of the 2 before spinning and planting the still futon charka-coated kunai into the back of the man's head. Naruto jumped forward, landing in front of the last root Anbu. The Chikudo came up, cutting the man in half from right hip to left shoulder. The blonde leapt back, avoiding the spraying blood and falling organs. Naruto felt a light tingle in the back of his mind. The cage bunchen he had left at the Genin gathering had just dispelled itself. The blonde jumped off towards the meeting point. It was time for him to shadow his genin. He wouldn't do anything drastic unless Root attacked them, but he would not let his genin die in this place. It was the promise of a lifetime. XXX. Kushina looked annoyed, waiting for the second round to start. So far her battlefield predictions were spot on. All of the teams she had put her eye on had advanced. But it was eating at her. What the hell were they doing here? Kushina knew all about Training Ground 44, of course. It was the only training ground that Naruto told them to stay away from. If her insane sensei told her to stay away from it, she was sure as hell going to. After all, there was always method to the blonde's madness, and Kushina was quite sure that this was no different. Though the redhead did wonder why were the Iwa genin glaring at her with hate. Naruto had never told her that he had been the one to defend Uzu. In the beginning his reason had been because he didn't want to color her opinion of him before they got to know each other. Even when he thought he had only gone back in time, Naruto was no fool. Kushina, his mother, and Kushina, his student, were very different people, so he wanted to get to know this Kushina without her having some kind of preconceptions about him. After that time had passed, the blonde's reasons changed. He had been given a message from Dat, Kushina's father and the current Uzumaki clan head, not to tell the redhead anything. The man had decided that he wanted to tell Kushina what had almost happened to Uzu in person. As such, the Uzukage had decided to come to Konoha himself, both to tell his daughter and visit her. When Naruto asked the Hokage about this, as he was quite sure that Dat wouldn't want to be out of his village after it had almost been attacked. Hiruzen had assured him that it would be fine. As for the duration of the Uzumaki's trip, Uzugakure would be stationed by a further 2 battalions of Anbu in addition to the forces already stationed there. Calming the undercover Uzumaki somewhat. After all, he didn't want to save Uzugakure from destruction just for it to happen anyway. Though his reason was starting to change, it seemed that he was doing it more for Kushina than himself now. That being said, she was a good kid, so Naruto didn't really mind the change of priorities at all. The redhead sighed, looking at the chain link fence around the training ground. It seemed they were trying to keep people out, or, she shivered, trying to keep something else in. The redhead and the other genin, hell Orochimaru himself and the other Konoha ninja at that moment had no idea that the training ground was currently the center stage of a private war between a pissed as all hell S-ranked shinobi and a lot of unfortunate members of Root. Hell, the body count was already above 50 and Naruto hadn't even been inside for more than 30 minutes yet. Though the blonde was a little pissed that he was running out of Root members, he may not be able to get to Danzo just yet, but Naruto could make do with his subordinates. Orochimaru walked to the front of the group and licked his lips. "Welcome, my cute little genin, to the Forest of Death. Please enjoy your stay." He smiled sadistically at the group of assembled genin, before holding up a piece of paper. "Now I need all you little genin to sign these papers, so that Konoha won't be responsible for your deaths." The snake Sanin reached into his pouch and took out a bell. "Your targets will be these bells. You will need one for each member of the team to enter the central tower in the middle of the forest. As there are 57 teams, a grand total of 19 teams could pass, so I'm going to tell you this now. Most of you won't pass. You have exactly 120 hours or 5 days from the moment I let you inside the forest to get your 3 bells and reach the tower. Any questions?" The snake Sanin ignored those that raised their hands. He wasn't in the mood to answer them anyway. "Okay then, my cute little genin, sign the forms and turn them into the booth to get your bell. Now off with you." Orochimaru finished his explanation and melted into earth, off to do whatever the hell it was he did in his spare time. Makoto turned to her teammates. "Any ideas?" she questioned. Kushina and Nawaki looked to the sky quickly. "First of all, we can't afford to hunt for our bells for too long. We only have 5 days, and the sooner we make it to that tower the better. More time to rest, more time to plan," Kushina stated before looking to the sky again, searching for some form of inspiration. Nawaki looked into the trees, a frown forming on his face. Perfect place for an ambush. Using Sensei and Kushina's seals as well as mundane traps would be good. Considering that both your and Kushina's elements are good at cutting things, we could probably form some good improvised traps beyond what we already have. Nawaki threw in his 2 cents and sighed. Makoto analyzed the information she had been given, plan forming in her mind. Okay, here's the plan. When we get the bell, Kushina will seal it into her arm using Fuinjutsu. That way it will be slightly harder to detect us using sound, might even give us a slight edge over the Hyuga. After all, if their Byakugan saw no bell, they were less likely to be bothered by the White-Eyed Clan. Nawaki and Kushina nodded, before looking at the girl intently. Kushina, can I assume that Sensei taught you some wide-range destructive jutsu? Makoto asked. Her red-headed friend nodded in return. Okay then. When we get inside, we will set an ambush point in the middle layer of the forest. The point where they would just be getting in sight of the tower and are most likely to drop their guard, even if briefly. At the start, Kushina will use a wide-range jutsu to push the team towards the traps. Once inside, they will likely start to panic and try to run back out the way they came in. When this happens, Kushina, I want you to bombard them with long-range wide-scale techniques. Nawaki, you set off the entire trap and make it safe for us to move in. At the end, all 3 of us attack as a cohesive unit and take them down quick and clean. If we get lucky, the opponent might even be taken down by the traps. If not, then we should at least be fighting a weakened foe. Any more suggestions? Makoto asked, looking at her 2 teammates. As you wish, fearless leader. Kushina and Nawaki declared with perfect synchronization. Makoto just sighed. It was freaky when they did that. The 3 genin of Team 5 retrieved their bell and were escorted to their own forest entrance. At the go signal, the 3 rushed inside, for some reason feeling like they were being watched. Not an uncomfortable feeling, but more like someone was watching over them. The 3 smiled unconsciously. It was a nice feeling. XXX. Naruto smiled to himself as he saw his genin team run inside the forest. They really were good kids. In the relatively short time they had known each other, Naruto had come to care for them beyond most. Far beyond what he did for most of the Leaf Village, even in his own dimension. Though he did find it a little strange that he would occasionally catch himself just watching how Kushina's hair caught the light or the way Makoto moved. Ah well, it was more than likely nothing. At least he hoped it was nothing. Naruto heard 3 almost silent thumps from behind him and turned to face the 3 root members, a sadistic grin on his face. Raiden chakra flared around his fists and feet. The Uzumaki cracked his neck from side to side, his sadistic grin firmly in place. Oh, I am so glad you are here. You 3 wouldn't mind being my test dummies, would you? The blonde charged. The 3 members of Root didn't even have time to scream. Nawaki spun, his kunai going out wide. His opponent, an AIM ninja, jumped back. The brown-haired Senju smiled as the ninja was knocked unconscious by Kushina from behind. Their plan had gone off without a hitch. They successfully lured, trapped and then destroyed the opposing team. It was nothing too impressive. The AIM ninja had been lured into an open clearing by a clone of Kushina. From there they ignited the explosive tags under the ground, disoriented the 3 and finished up with taijutsu. It was quick, it was brutal, but most of all it was efficient, just the way Naruto had taught them. Nawaki threw a look at Makoto, who was checking over the 3 AIM ninja. Any luck? The Senju asked. The Uchiha smiled and nodded. Yep, got one. Makoto yelled back, smiling as she threw a bell up and down in her hand, causing Nawaki and Kushina to smile at her. Now they just needed one more. They couldn't stay here though, the whole place just screamed ambush now. Ignoring the 3 AIM ninjas still out cold on the ground, they took back to the trees. One more bell, just one more bell, and they would be done. But that raised a question. After they gathered the bells, what should they do next? If they followed the general guidelines that they had been given, then heading to the tower would be their best bet, but would that really be the best choice? They still would have a lot of time on their hands at the rate they were going. It was more than likely they would turn up to the tower with time to spare. Maybe they should hunt down other teams after obtaining the bells, reduce the competition and all that. Nawaki shook the thoughts out of his head. He would offer his opinion to Makoto if asked, but the girl really was the brains of the operation, so she probably had weighed all the options already. The 3 genin continued onwards, blissfully unaware of the blonde shadowing them from behind. For their protection, of course. Not that Naruto would deny that it was more than a little fun watching them beat the hell out of other genin, Naruto only hoped that they didn't run into an Iwa team. Kushina was obviously an Uzumaki and the Hidden Stone would likely be looking for revenge. XXX. Naruto gulped down air as if it were water. It hadn't taken him long to kill the three-root Anbu, but his exertions over the last hour had been starting to catch up with him. The blonde was not a god, and the use of his incomplete Raiden no Yoroi was taking a toll on his body, even with Akane fixing him up. The blonde popped the top on his canteen of water and drank deeply. His kill count for the day was at a grand total of 63, though Naruto was quite sure that the root Anbu had retreated from the forest. Either that or they were better at hiding than he had been giving them credit for. Either way, it didn't change his job. Naruto had to watch over his team in order to ensure that they were not abducted, either by Root or by anyone else. The blonde was reminded of the story his mother had once told him about being abducted by Kumo and having his father save her. If Naruto was right, Kumo did that not only because of Kushina's unique chakra but also because she was the last Uzumaki. Considering there was a whole village left, Kumo might not even make an attempt this time around. That being said, if Kumo was to make an attempt, then the second exam would have been the perfect time to do so. The blonde sighed and closed his eyes, leaning back against a tree. He wasn't a god. Oh, he had been called one before. A living god of war, to be exact, but Naruto was not arrogant enough to believe himself to be a god. All his plans that had worked so far had been a mix of pure dumb luck and really good bluffs, all working well together, with the occasional Kodoamatsukami thrown in for good measure. But Naruto was no fool. He couldn't go on like this. Eventually questions were going to be asked about his past, and when the time came he would have to be able to answer them. Naruto grimaced. He needed to get started on that plan and fast. The blonde made a shadow clone and the clone took off. It already knew what its creator wanted. Naruto shook his musing off and turned his attention back to his team. He needed to be focused right now. He would allow no mistakes. XXX. Makoto lead her team through the forest at a run. Every other genin team would call it a sprint. What they needed to do was simple. Locate another team, fight them, win, take the bell and run like hell back to the tower. She had weighed the options of staying outside and reducing the competition before discarding it. While a sound idea in theory, its practical application left a lot to be desired. For one, it left them open to a counter-attack by the other teams. Two, they would be exhausted when they got to the tower. Makoto had done some research on the Chunin exams once her sensei had entered them. The third phase was always a one-on-one combat scenario, and it was always completed in one day. That meant that the second round had to cut down the participants to acceptable levels, and if that failed, there was the possibility of a preliminary round that had to be considered. No, the best plan would be to head to the tower as soon as they had the third bell and let the forest and the preliminary rounds do the heavy lifting for them. That was a sound plan. The real problem with the plan came in the amount of time it would take them to get another bell. If they took too long, then people that didn't get a bell or had theirs stolen or destroyed would begin to crowd the area around the tower, trying to take the bells of the teams that had already completed the job, and were likely exhausted and wounded. Time was of the essence here. That meant that they didn't have any of it to waste. They needed to get a bell and get out fast. The black-haired Uchiha landed silently on a branch overlooking a small clearing. Not what she was looking for, but it would do now. All they needed to do was set the trap. Makoto turned back to her team, a shark-like grin on her face as she began to direct them with nothing but hand signs. Naruto had, quite literally, beaten the need for silent communication into each and every one of his charges' heads and hadn't let up until all three of them could communicate perfectly in silent code. If any Anbu had been watching at that exact moment, they would have wondered where the hell Jonin of all things had picked up their silent code from. The idea for the ambush was simple. The clearing was quite wide and spacious, perfect for an ambush, so naturally no ninja worth a damn would jump into it without checking it for dangers first. What Team 5 planned to do was simple. They would make the ambush so blatantly obvious that anyone could see it coming a mile away, provided that they had actually been trained in ambush and counter-ambush tactics. Something that Naruto had insisted every ninja needed to know, and not enough did. Naoki still shivered when that training was brought up. For some reason the Senju had gotten it worse than his two teammates when it came to that training. While the ambush was blatantly obvious, it was also the point. The ambush would be so ridiculous that no team that found it would take it seriously, and when Team 5 revealed themselves, the opposing team would, naturally, not think much of them due to their bad ambush tactics and not take them seriously. It would be the mistake that would cost the opposing team their bell, and maybe their lives if it came down to it. However, the ambush that she was planning was also double-layered, much like any decent genjutsu. The surface traps for the ambush were obvious, the ones that she actually expected to do damage weren't. The log that was suspended above the clearing would kill someone if it connected. It was also placed so it was blatantly obvious it was there, and it allowed anyone it attacked 12 different avenues of escape. However, the landing zone of each of these landing zones was infected with a tasteless, smell-less and colorless airborne poison that would slow down their opponent's movements and reaction times. It was a poison that all members of Team 5 were immune to, due to having an antidote on them. Once the person hit the poison field, they wouldn't notice the drop in their abilities instantly and would jump away when the, again blatantly obvious, ninja wire and exploding tags popped up, forcing the opposing force to dodge them. The explosion itself was the next trap. The explosive tags carried inside of them an agent that made the poison work faster and allowed their targets 3 avenues of escape, each of which led to an equally obvious wire trap. Now, based on their opponent's knowledge of their traps, they would know that they could avoid the trap before it sprung. Except that they wouldn't be taking the poison into account, or the fact that unlike the other wire traps, this one would activate in less than 0.05 of a second. They also wouldn't know that the wires were coated in a knockout poison. All in all, Makoto thought it was a pretty good plan. XXX. Kushina hummed to herself as she laid down another explosive tag. As much as the redhead absolutely hated her sensei on occasion, she did have to admit one thing: the man knew his explosives. 10 times the bang, exactly the same size. Kushina had almost begged to learn how to make them. Naruto had eventually gotten so annoyed with her constantly asking to be taught how to make his special explosive tags that the blonde had cut his miniature mother a deal. If Kushina made it to the final rounds of the Chunin exams, he would teach her how to make the tags as well as spend time with her on Fuinjutsu so she could better learn her clan's speciality. Kushina honestly thought that it was an odd relationship that the others and she had with their sensei. Naruto was more like an older brother or best friend to the trio of Jonin than a sensei, well, most of the time anyway. Kushina didn't know a single team besides her own that had such a close relationship with their sensei. While it was true that every team eventually became close with their teachers, very few of them ever grew into the same kind of sibling relationship that Team 5 had with Naruto. Even when the relationship between teacher and student grew so close in other teams, it was normally only with one student, not the entire team. The redhead smiled to herself as she began to place the ninja wire around the clearing. Naoki and Makoto were in charge of their own areas. When she had first arrived in Konoha, Kushina wasn't treated very well. Her red hair made her an outsider, and despite being one of the more open villages when it came to trade and commerce, if there was one thing that Konoha disliked, it was outsiders. Even if those outsiders were related to their Shodai Hokage's wife, the fact that Kushina was the Jinchuriki of Kyubi did not help matters. As the redhead was the only Uzumaki living in Konoha, she had no one to rely on. Some of the people inside Konoha had even said things when they thought she couldn't hear them, saying that she had been sent off from her clan because she was a disgrace or something like that, and Konoha had been nice enough to pick her up. What made Kushina mad was that even if she told them what she knew to be true, that her clan, her father, her mother, her sisters and her brother still loved her, when the people of Konoha asked back, "Then why did they make you come here?" Kushina couldn't answer them. The redhead could hardly just come out and say, "My family sent me here to become the next Jinchuriki of the Kyubi to keep you all safe." Well, actually, now that she thought about it, Kushina decided that she probably could say that, but it would make more problems than it would solve. Sure, telling the people of Konoha that would stop them talking about how her family had supposedly abandoned her behind her back, but it would also make them see her as a monster. Kushina knew how the Jinchuriki were treated in other villages. Her life in Konoha wasn't what she wanted it to be. She didn't have her family nearby. She couldn't see her father and mother or her brothers and sisters whenever she wanted, but her life in Konoha could also be a whole lot worse. The redhead tightened the last piece of ninja wire and pulled it into place. To be honest, Kushina had been lonely in Konoha, very lonely. It was only in her 3rd year in the academy that she had finally gotten a friends in Makoto-chan and Naoki-kun, but even then she was still lonely. Sure, friends helped, but they didn't fill the void. Family, she wanted a family. On her birthdays Kushina never really got much, that being said the redhead couldn't really expect much considering that she didn't have any family in the village. But until Naoki and Makoto had come along she hadn't even gotten a happy birthday from anyone. It was one of the reasons that she was grateful to have Naruto as a sensei. Most teams of genin became fast friends, best friends. People who watched each other's backs and protected each other. Slowly but surely Team 5 had become something more. Somehow from the soul-crushing training to the days they just spent together enjoying each other's company and even sneaking into Naruto-sensei's house with Makoto and Naoki to wake the blonde up, Team 5 had become something more. The dysfunctional four had become a kind of makeshift family. It was a reason that Kushina wanted to thank her sensei but didn't know how to. Because, thanks in some ways, a lot of ways, to him, she wasn't alone anymore. It was also the reason that Kushina liked spending time at Naruto's apartment as often as she could, for as long as she could. Because she was trying to do for the blonde what Naruto had done for her. Kushina wasn't sure if Naoki and Makoto had noticed it, but the blonde never talked about his family and very rarely about his friends. More importantly, when he did talk about them it was always things like, Ino loved flowers like that, or, Choji used to love meals like that. He always talked about the things that his friends loved when he spoke of them, which was very little. Naruto always talked about the things that his friends loved, about the world his friends loved. Not even once had Kushina heard Naruto speak about the world that he loved. From the slight amount of melancholy that Naruto had when spoke of them, Kushina was able to deduce one thing: the blonde's friends, his family, they were all dead. Or at the very least Naruto could no longer see them. Kushina had come up with a goal for herself after she came to that conclusion. She would do for her sensei what he had done for her. Kushina had decided to show Naruto that he wasn't alone anymore. Kushina jumped back into the trees and settled into wait. While the work of setting up the trap had been good for her to reminisce and think, now it was time to get her head back into the game and perform like a real ninja again. The poor bastards that dropped into this trap would never know what hit them, of that Kushina felt assured. XXX. Naruto couldn't help the yawn that came out of his mouth as his genin team made a beeline for the tower after dispatching a team of Taki nin. The trap had gone off exactly the way his three cute little genin had intended it to. The three Taki nin were poisoned and tied up in ninja wire before they could blink. From there it was a simple knock to the back of their heads with kunai by his genin and they were away with their last bell. Naruto had checked the time as well. At the rate that Makoto, Naoki and Kushina were moving they would finish the entire second segment in around an hour and 20. Take that, Gaara. Well, at least this job had been easy. Thankfully he had been able to force Root to retreat before any teams got too far into the forest, otherwise things would have gotten messy. Naruto couldn't help the smile that came to his face as he saw his genin enter the tower. Naruto unsealed a clock and looked down. 1 hour 17 minutes, take that, Gaara. The black-haired blonde took off his mask and sealed it away before using the henge to hide his now black hair, returning it to its normal golden blonde, not a moment too soon. Naruto felt like his body was stretched for a second before vanishing in a puff of smoke only to reappear inside the tower and facing his, surprised as all hell, genin team. Naruto just gave them one lazy wave. Yo. That's it for this part. If you enjoyed it then like, share and subscribe for the next video as it's going to be more interesting, and also check out my other playlists, hope you would like them too.